decision-making in creating life-centered products and cities. Our speaker for our final session of the day is a sustainability and circular economy provocateur who challenges people to think differently about how the world works. She was named Champion of the Earth by the UN Environment Program, is a main stage TED speaker, entrepreneur, creator of the Disruptive Design Method, and founder of two educational platforms, the Unschool of Disruptive Design and Swivel Skills. Let's all welcome Ms. Leyla Acaroglu.
Hi everyone, who's tired? You guys have been through a lot today, so I'm going to give you lots and lots of additional energy. So you just need to sit back and be prepared for a pretty intense whirlwind experience. Now, my name is Leyla Acaroglu. I am a designer and a sociologist, and I am deeply passionate about how we can design solutions that help solve some of the world's biggest problems. And when I decided to become a designer, I really didn't know that the world had a bunch of problems. I was quite young, and I just wanted to fix really obvious problems like TV remote controls that had way too many buttons and made no sense to me whatsoever. But as I started to study design, I realized that actually design has so many different problems that we need to solve. And so it actually became a major passion and driving force in my career. And to this day, it's still the major driving force. I'm very fortunate. I've gotten to travel the world and speak to wonderful audiences like yourself and world leaders, as well as major companies and organizations. And in a lot of the work that I've done, it's really about transforming the way we see the environment and our role within it. And for that, I was named Champion of the Earth, which is great. I developed some superpowers, apparently, as a result of it. I haven't tested the flying one yet, so we'll see how that goes. I founded the Unschool of Disruptive Design, which is an experimental knowledge lab for adults. And this year we turned 10, which is really cool. We've worked with people all over the world. Yeah, thank you. We've worked with professionals all over the world, helping them gain the skills that help them themselves transform the way they exist in the world. And I personally, as a designer, I design tools to help people make change. So I've designed lots of different toolkits and experiences that really trigger the cognitive engagement to help people think differently about the problems we face. One of the ones I'm really proud of is called the Circular Classroom. It's free if you're interested after this talk in learning more about circularity. This was designed for high school students, but it still applies. I also designed a project with the United Nations called the Anatomy of Action, which was all about trying to activate sustainable lifestyles. And you and I, hopefully, all have a couple of these guys, which are the tools that we interact with the world every single day. And so we developed this mimetic reference and a whole bunch of different strategies that individuals can take to change their lifestyle to support sustainability. Because whilst most of us in this room have some sort of professional design or are interested in the role of design, every single human on this planet is a citizen designer. And the way I define this is that the world is made up of individual actions, meaning if you work as a designer, it's likely that you get given a brief that's the response of data that is the outcome of individual choices. What you buy, what you click on, what you don't buy, what you don't watch. These all inform the kind of world that we live in. So every single one of us has power in the system that we are within as consumers or users or whatever word we want to use to describe what I call everyday citizens, because the future that we end up in is the product of the choices we make today. And unfortunately, a lot of the challenges that we face were the product of yesterday's solutions. So as a designer, I'd like to hope that we could all design solutions today that don't become tomorrow's problems. And one of the biggest problems we face is the fact that we have become, in a very short period of time, a hyper-waste-based society. Not just here, but every single country in this world has a massive problem with the amount of waste we produce. And the solution that we put in place, the solution that we have all kind of hoped would solve the problem, recycling, has actually made it worse. So the thing about recycling is it, A, does not keep up with the rate of disposable products, but B, most things that are produced are actually not recyclable, right? The combination of materials. The reality is that we've all kind of been duped into thinking that recycling will fix the problem. And the recycling industry are the ones who actually suffer the most, because you and I all do this thing called wish cycling. I know you do it. I even do it. And I'm an expert in this field, and I still do it. And I'm like, bad Leyla. And that is where you put something in the recycling bin that you know is not recyclable, but you hope so much, you wish that it will just be recycled, right? And the poor recycling industry, they have to figure out what to do with the diapers, Christmas lights, soft plastics, coffee cups, which are made of paper but lined with plastic and totally do not go through the recycling system. And so this ultimately creates a financially unviable solution. Look, to put it in perspective, only 9% of all plastics ever produced have been recycled, right? 9%. And this concept of waste is something that only humans have produced. In nature, everything has a role or a place, whereas humans create this thing called waste that we just kind of like hope will disappear into a place that is not bad. But we live on a planet that has an infinite amount of different resources, but not an infinite amount of resources. So we have hundreds of thousands of different materials and minerals that we're able to pull out of the ground and convert into this wealth, this incredible consumer culture that we're in. But for everything we take out, it must return. And that cycle of extraction, production, and waste is what we call the linear economy. And it's fundamentally flawed because it essentially creates legacy problems for tomorrow. Globally, only 20% of all products produced are ever recycled. And if you look at something like technology, it's a really low rate. So what we want to do is design a future where there is no disposability, where recycling, as wonderful as it could be, is actually not the thing we rely on, that we redesign the problem from the beginning. And just to get a little bit nerdy with you all, but I feel like after the intense, incredible day you've had, you can all cope with this, hopefully. So we started this morning talking about gross national happiness, which is an antidote to GDP, gross domestic product, which is problematic because it doesn't account for the environmental and social impacts that our current economy has, and that technically is called an externality. And the thing with externalities is that all of nature is, according to our current economic system, not valued. So no tree, no fresh air, nothing. The only things that are valued are things that are pulled out of the ground and somebody has commodified. So we have no incentive to protect the natural world. And likewise, waste is actually a financially beneficial thing because somebody gets paid to deal with it, right? But once it escapes into nature and it ends up as ocean plastic waste, it gets completely ignored from the system again until someone then has to go and be paid to collect it, right? So we've perversified our economic system. And this is part of the problem that we have as humans. You know, we're wonderful, but we're also a hot mess. I can say that because I'm a sociologist and I have really spent a lot of time trying to understand why humans do the kind of crazy things we do. And we have desires, for sure. But a lot of those desires are manipulated. And they're manipulated, unfortunately, by our profession. We're pretty good at it, right? We make things beautiful, frictionless, desirable. We do. Whether it's in graphic design, fashion design, industrial design, architecture, landscape architecture, service design, there's so many different ways that we can really work on the flaws of the human psyche and get people to buy stuff they don't need to try and make them feel better about themselves in a world that we know is just going to hell in a handbasket because of climate change. How are you all feeling? Oh, and that's what I wanted to say. Because one of the things about desire is I think, and this is just an assumption, that kind of a really innate human desire is actually to have hope. To have hope for a world that is better, have hope for our kids and for our family to be healthy and happy, have hope for ourselves. And so imagine if we were to actually design products and services that made us hopeful of a better world, rather than just kind of got us stuck in a system of thinking that the next iPhone will somehow magically get us a date. So there is this big problem. There's multiple problems, of which I do not think are wicked, by the way. I think they're just very complex, and perhaps then maybe you need to take them on a date and understand them a little bit more before you discount them. But one of the big problems that we have is waste and plastic. I'm sure you're all familiar with this issue. Do you guys have a problem with plastic waste in the Philippines? Yeah. I love your laugh. So who knows the history of what incentivized an inventor to make plastic? Who knows the history of this?
Deforestation.
Does anyone?
Deforestation.
Huh? Say it louder.
Deforestation.
Deforestation. Interesting. That is a good thought, but it's actually not that. Mass production, no. Okay, this might be a little. You want to have a go then? He's got his arm up. Did you want to have a go? No. All right, just stretching that one arm. All right, in the upward direction. Okay, wait for it. You will not believe it. Ooh, someone knows. It's this game called billiards. Do you know it? Okay, who's gotten drunk and played and very good when you drink too much, right? Sorry if anyone's too young to drink, but it's a thing. So, in 1868 in New York, there was a company that made billiard balls. And somehow, at that period of time, this game became very popular with the fancy class in the colonizing countries in Europe and the US. And so basically this company had an issue because the raw material that they made billiard balls out of was coming from a certain animal. Who knows what animal that was? Yes, it was coming from these guys. And so, whoa. Yes, I know, it's terrible. They killed about 26 million of them. But anyway, for door handles and hairbrushes and all sorts of other things. Because at this period in human history, we were constrained by the rate in which nature reproduced materials. And humans needed another way of creating materials to be able to deal with the demand of people being able to hit balls around a table for fun. And so some guy, first of all, this company, they make a design challenge. $10,000 in those days, it's about 100 and something thousand today. And some guy, upstate New York, goes and produces a plastic called cellulose. So it doesn't win the competition though, because cellulose, when converted into a ball and hit with another ball, explodes. So he tried to set up a company, but that didn't work. But he had something to do with the whole motion picture industry as a result of it or something else. And then it was not for another 40 years after that that we actually got the first synthesized commercial plastics that was Bakelite that, helped some bombs be dropped and so forth. But anyway, and Tupperware, which has now gone under. Anyway, so that was a very quick history of how a design challenge resulted in the present hot mess we have today with ocean plastic waste and also having microplastics in our body. And that was not that long ago. So the question I have now is, we're at this moment in time where we have climate crisis, nature destruction, social inequality, I could go on, right? So who has the power to design a better future? A lot of us do believe that it's those who are given power or those who have stolen it, but not that every single one of us has that power. But here's the coolest thing about the future, is that absolutely no one, not even someone who charges you to look at a crystal ball or at tarot cards, can actually tell you what the future will hold. In fact, there are multiple potential futures that at any one time we could go into based on the actions of individuals. And so the potential for us to help create and construct a better future is available to every single one of us. And what it comes down to is each of us understanding our own agency, which is not a design agency of which you might work for or run, but it is the ability for you to see that you have the ability to influence those around you, that you can take resources and convert them into something that is greater than yourself. And it connects to this other concept, which I've heard today already, but it's this idea of your sphere of influence, and every single one of us has it. When you're a little baby, the sphere of influence is your parents and your neighbors as you squeal your little arms out and demand things from them, and then you become a teenager and it's all your friends because you're trying to be cool or look good. And then you become an adult and you get a job, and it might be your peers or your colleagues, or you could become a social media influencer and it could be other people. But ultimately, we all have the capacity, no matter who we are, to exert some influence on the system around us. And that is the one important thing in obtaining hope for a better future, is to activate your own agency. Because if you sit back and let the world happen, whether that be a good or bad outcome, you haven't contributed to constructing the future that you want to be a part of. And I became a designer because I love problems, right? I really do. You're all laughing. Do you all love problems?
Love problems.
No? What's wrong? I always say, like, the thing about problems is that we don't spend enough time trying to understand what makes them tick. So I did already mention it, but next time you encounter a problem, I highly suggest you approach it like taking it on a date. You want to ask it questions and not talk too much. You want to make eye contact and pretend you're interested. Let it expose some interesting things about itself before you judge it. Because so much of us are quick to assume that a problem is stagnant or it's always going to be there, rather than it's constantly changing. Because we live in a very complex world. And I truly believe that designers are the provocateurs of the future that we want to live in. Whether it is designing for marketing or communication or physical products, we actually do have the power to influence those around us. And we have to change the narrative. And one of the big challenges right now is changing the narrative from a kind of predetermined, like really terrible future to one that we could actively construct a regenerative pathway to. And regeneration is really about giving back more than we take. And it's about overcoming this idea that we have to break the world down into manageable parts. This concept of reductive, breaking the world down, this idea of the linear process, this is all part of an old way of thinking about the world. And we, our generation, and every generation who's alive right now, has the opportunity to overcome this extractive, exploitive economy by redesigning the way we approach these systems. So, you know, the mindset shifts that we have available to us are to start to see that we live in a complex, constantly changing, beautiful world. But that complexity is amazing. It makes the forest of all its beauty, as well as like your hot mess family that you can't deal with sometimes, right? Every single thing that exists is a result of the beautiful complexity of the only known life-sustaining planet in the entire universe. And by approaching problems with that same openness, then we can each start to add value to it. And the idea of regeneration, both in how we produce goods and services and how we approach problems, is that we are adding. You guys know that whole thing when, like, the yes and versus no? You know, when someone asks you a question, you know, you should go, oh, yes, and here's my opinion. Here's why I don't like it. Rather than just saying no. It's a little bit like that. We're trying to find ways of changing the narrative. And one of the most incredible ways, and in this country especially as well, in my country, Australia, we have incredible knowledge, pre-colonial knowledge of how to live sustainably on this planet. Indigenous knowledge systems are an unrespected, incredibly historical but very contemporary set of systems of how to live within the means of this planet. And we have the opportunity to learn how to live in the systems that nature creates by changing our relationship to nature. Because one thing we also know to be true is that we live in an interdependent world. We are relying on phytoplankton, photosynthesizing for our oxygen. We're relying on food that nature produced. We are all part of this complex, interconnected system. But this planet that we live on has limits. And for the next 3 to 5 minutes, I might depress you, but I promise you it'll get better. So stick with me, okay? Maybe just 2.5 minutes. So basically, there's a lot of science now that shows that we've kind of messed things up, but we still have the ability to fix it, so we're going to get there. One of them is really worth looking into. It's about what's called the planetary boundaries, which is the systems that sustain life and that work together. And you can see that since we started recording them, we have continued to exceed them. And one of the main reasons is this thing called consumption, where we just can't get enough of stuff because of that desire. And so we keep buying things we don't need, thinking we're going to get happy, which doesn't work, does it? Does not work. Asking the expert in the front row. You cannot buy your way to happiness, people. It's been proven. Anyway, and what we've seen is that since the 1970s, all of humanity, maybe except Bhutan, has been living beyond its means. You know, on average, we collectively use 1.6 planets every single year. There's a day in the calendar called Earth Overshoot Day, which is the day we've used up all the resources allocated to us if we were to live sustainably. And every year it's around July or August. So we are presently living in future resource consumption right now because it's September. And essentially, unfortunately, our rate of consumption and our desire for things that we can buy cheaply and throw out has dramatically affected nature. And nature's so critical because if we don't have the bees and the grubs and all the other things, then the systems that produce the food that we need doesn't work. So the rate of decline of the natural world has been growing exponentially at the same rate of our extraction. And I don't want to get into it. It's so depressing. But anyway, we've got a lot of resource shortages, a lot of valuable materials that are required in order for us to have AI, which nobody wants to talk about the ecological footprint of. But anyway, essentially, we're running out of them. It's really problematic. You guys probably don't know about it, but everybody else is just who's like working in sustainability is like, ooh, it's not good. And then, right after I just like slapped some depressing things on you, you might be feeling this thing called eco-anxiety or climate anxiety, which is a phenomenon where people actually have physiological reactions and mental health issues to the reality of the nature decline. And we just did a study on this. I was really surprised at how the demographics of this are impacting people. But those people who have experienced acute environmental destructive behavior, like maybe some typhoons, tend to have a higher rate of eco-anxiety, right? Because you are more exposed to the threat. And do you know what the remedy to this is? We have this toolkit, you can download it for free. The remedy to this is great. Who can guess what the remedy to eco-anxiety is? Who say it louder? Nature. Yes, it is spending time in nature. Not just any time, roughly 2 hours a week, scientifically proven, but also just looking at tree canopies, right? These things can actually trigger calming effect on your nervous system. And this is the thing. So we have this incredible opportunity to transform the world around us, but we do have to also face the complexity of the challenges. And I did mention I'm a sociologist, and I cannot help but share with you some of the issues that the human brain has. So, you know, humanity is an incredible thing. Great experiment. I'd like to see us succeed. But we do have this brain system that is really amazing, but also riddled with problems. We have cognitive biases. And the thing about cognitive biases, despite us all growing up in different cultures, speaking different languages, having different life experiences, collectively, universally, we all have the same biases, which I like to call brain glitches. So there's hundreds of them that have been discovered by behavioral economists and sociologists. And here, let me give you a few. Confirmation bias. When you seek out information that confirms what you already believe. Next time you're Googling, watch what you click on, because I guarantee you, you will skip over the things that do not give you the information that you want. Status quo bias. Everybody wants to maintain the harmony of what is the perceived status quo. If you walk into a new job, you're going to be analyzing how everybody else is behaving, and then you're going to fit in so that you don't stick out and get fired right away. Right? So that means that everybody is working to maintain the status quo, even if the status quo is fundamentally flawed. Anchoring effect. When you get given a piece of information, like the price of something, and then that anchors you in that, so that every other piece of information will be referenced to that first piece, right? So that's why we get really annoyed if prices go up. Choice paralysis. This happens to me all the time. Too many choices, can't make a decision, run out of the store, crying. No. I just do that because of the consumption problem and the plastic stuff. Anyway, but yeah, we have a really series of these. There's hundreds of them. Loss aversion. Okay, if you lose, is 1,000 pesos like a lot of money? Yeah. Okay, if you lose 1,000 pesos, it will hurt you cognitively for double the time if you find 1,000 pesos. So you'll feel good for half as much time. And this is why we have things called negativity bias, where when you see negative information, you remember it and fixate on it longer, because the brain is wired to show you threats. to protect you. And then on the other hand, we have something called optimism bias, which sounds good, but actually what it does is it is our brain's protection mechanism when we're confronted with perhaps climate change or other really intense things. Our brain goes, you know what? It's going to be okay. You are going to be okay. I'm going to make sure that nothing bad happens to you. So just keep going about your day and don't stress about it. So it actually kind of pacifies us to the reality of the situation. And here we are as these incredible, hot messes with the brains and all the rest of it. And we have to also navigate society. And we are also very, very susceptible to responding to social norms. And social norms are the kind of dominant practices or behaviors that we see around us. And this also means that if other people are not caring, they're complacent, they're not talking about these things, then you're likely to follow those norms, right? Which perpetuates the lack of engagement or the lack of agency. And so we have to think about how we can each activate ourselves in our roles as designers to start to transform the way we produce goods and services and how we live our lives as a collective whole, because that is then contagious. And it's funny because we talk about educating kids, and I always say, like, kids, they're great, love them. They get sustainability. They're like, butterflies, right? I always say, if you're above this height, you stop caring because, the world has damaged you already. But the reality is that adults are the ones with the power and the influence, and who do the kids look to? They look to the behavior of the adults around them. So if you want to educate kids, you need to change your own practices to show the possibility of the future that they're going to live in. And this is where we can actually really use sustainability as a transformative tool. And sustainability is not just about the environmental impacts. Technically, it is the social, economic, and environmental impacts of anything we do. It's harmonizing them. It's a technical tool set. And within the sustainability movement, we have this incredible new movement called the circular economy, which is the antidote to that linear reductive one I mentioned earlier. And in order to do this, we need to achieve these three goals. We are looking to eliminate waste entirely through design, extend the usable life of products, and regenerate natural systems. These are the three goals of the circular economy. And this is the coolest thing about it. It is all about design. It is all about the way we design products, we design our relationship to products, and our business models. And so there's an incredible opportunity for us to actually spearhead the design of circular products and services, because we are the ones, as designers, who know how to make things look good, function, and also are desirable. But the added skill that designers need is to know what a circular product or service is and how to deliver that. So essentially, we're trying to figure out how to unwaste resources. And that's not just about being efficient. Efficiency, that's okay, it's good. Actually, you're trying to redesign the value proposition of your product. Because presently, our economy devalues everything valuable, like nature, social cohesion, etc. And so we're trying to figure out how to change that. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to just get through a couple of things here. First of all, we need to figure out how to be nature positive, which is understanding how nature works, which most people actually don't really know how nature works. And we're trying to not mimic nature, but we're trying to work within nature's systems. So thinking about what's nature-based design solutions, which is not just about putting trees on buildings, that's useful, but it's actually about understanding the practices and rhythms of how nature solves problems so that we can implement that in our design strategies. And that might be biomaterials, but it's also about things like no such thing as waste in nature. All materials are broken down and reused. So how do we create cycles or flows or systems where the byproduct of one production process becomes the input for another? And because everybody remembers things that has to do with beer, I will give you an example. There's a brewery in Scotland. It's called Toast. Why is it called Toast? Because it's made from the bread from a bakery, the waste bread from a bakery next door. right? So instead of the bread going to waste, they turn that into beer. What a great idea. But this is a really simple concept, and but it's in the technical term, it's called industrial symbiosis, where different companies set up together and they create an ecosystem where the waste material from one is the input to another. So we talked about AI. I don't know if the ecological footprint was discussed. It's really big. It's really bad. Don't every time you chat GPT, feel bad about a tree dying somewhere. Anyway, so I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, servers. That's right. One of the big issues with anything to do with the internet is servers. And there's like servers use a lot of power, but they need to be cooled because they get really hot. So there's like swimming pools that are heated by the waste energy from the servers. You know, these are simple concepts, but essentially where it's one, you're putting things together in ways that make sense, where the waste from one is the resource for another. That's what trees do. We exhale carbon dioxide and trees go, delicious, thank you, humans. Just don't cut me down. And so one of the ways we can do this is an incredible tool called systems thinking, which is us learning to think in a different way about the problems around us. And there's a lot of things I could say about this, and I don't have any time left, so I'm going to do it really fast, and then you can like Google it later. But basically, what happens is most of us focus on the most obvious part of the system. You've heard this before, the iceberg model, right? But in systems thinking, what we're doing is we're trying to get all the way down to the bottom, which is actually the mental models, which is the human concepts, because all of the problems around us were created by humans, right? So we could actually change them all because we created them in some way or another. So in systems thinking, we're trying to understand how we can maximize the benefit to all parts of the system. And it's like a lot more complicated than the 30 seconds I have to explain it. But generally, what we're trying to do is always look for connections and relationships. So rather than the obvious part of the system, we're trying to figure out how to design for the whole system's benefit rather than the parts. And we're looking to maximize the benefit to all parts of the system. So if you're talking about a supply chain, you have to collaborate across the supply chain and create those kinds of ecosystems that I mentioned earlier. Anyway, I really don't have time to go into it. Is this how many minutes I have left or how many I'm over? How many I have left? Did you add more to it? Because it went up. I was like, magic. One time it was the opposite, and I just kept talking for like an additional 30 minutes because it had gone into the downtime, because I don't know what's going on when I'm up here, to be completely honest. Anyway, okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm really into helping designers and other people figure out how to activate their agency to make more change. And 10 years ago or so, I created this thing called the Disruptive Design Method, which is based on systems thinking, and it's a really simple scaffolding. And I call it a scaffolding because you all have skills, I hope. And you have experiences and you have your own way of doing things. But what you need, which you didn't get, is thinking in systems, learning to love problems, and then applying that knowledge to your design skill set. So we talk about this as a 3-part process of mining, landscaping, and building, and it was totally intentionally a construction metaphor, so you don't forget it. And if you think about it, like it's like at the beginning of a building, you have to put the exoskeleton, the scaffolding up to hold the building. And the first phase is mining. It's learning to love a problem. It's really about understanding that every problem can solve itself if you understand the parts. Think about that iceberg. It's about going all the way down the bottom. And then we do landscaping, which is the systems part. It's where we put all the pieces we've mined together, and we come up like the bird's eye view, and we see the complex whole. And all the parts, like a big jigsaw puzzle, start to make more sense. And rather than blaming the most obvious part of the system for the problem we're trying to solve, we can actually see the complex whole and figure out, and this is the key point, where we can intervene in that system through good design to make the most efficient and effective outcome. And therefore, we don't waste as much resources in trying to interrupt the status quo of these unsustainable systems that I'm talking about. So essentially, very important fact, most people solve the wrong problem. It's a big problem in design. Have you guys gotten briefs where you're like, and then you have the clients and you're like, oh, anyway. I had one of them recently. It's like, torture. Anyway, yeah, we keep going on, don't we? We just can't help ourselves. Got to keep creating things. Anyway, okay, so here's the thing. It's better for us to figure out how to solve the right problem wrong than the wrong problem right. And so many people don't spend enough time trying to understand the problem. And so they invest a lot of energy and resources and money in solving the wrong problem really well, multiple times. So that's what we're trying to overcome. And I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, oh, that's great, lady, but how do I integrate this into my job, life, etc.? Well, my suggestion is subversion. Nobody needs to know that you're doing it. Because most of the time, as a designer, somebody's coming to you to solve a problem that they have no idea how you're going to do it. And then you do it and they go, that looks easy. Which is not, right? So if we can insert the sustainability, circularity concepts into this, then we can actually start to really disrupt the way that we are creating goods and services. And if you're still not convinced that this is a really big necessity, well, let me tell you now that things are changing very fast. A couple months ago, we got the new international standards on the circular economy. There are now 3 that basically provide the guidance for companies in, oh, I saw you wanted to take photos. I'll give you an extra second. It's counting down, guys. They're not going to give me any more minutes to, Anyway, so they're really cool. There's 6, these are the 6 circular economy principles. And it literally has a guideline for how companies can transition from linear to circular. And essentially, it talks about how we need to design our economic system to be nested within the social and environmental so that the things we do in the economy benefit humans and the planet. Oh my God, wouldn't that be freaking amazing? Right? Like, instead of it just benefiting a false system that doesn't understand, because it externalizes all of the things that are valuable, like nature and butterflies and things like that. Butterflies are very cool, guys. They start off as worms and they become butterflies. Like, who designed that shit? I mean, someone might be able to answer that, but in my opinion, that was nature and all of its wisdom. So essentially, there's also a lot of new, very boring EU regulations, but great if you're into sustainability. There's a new one that came out a couple of weeks ago called the Eco Design regulation. Actually, it's no longer the directive, which requires companies of all product categories to create circular and sustainable products. And consumer groups can sue importers if they haven't done it. And we have a lot of different mechanisms now. Everybody just close your eyes, don't look. Sorry. I had already deleted a bunch of slides before I came on stage as well. Because I was like, these poor people are going to be so tired and I'm going to hurt them with my fast-paced Australianisms and my great jokes, right? Okay, I wanted to get to this because in the circular economy, there's a hierarchy. So I started off by talking about recycling. And what you will see is that recycling is all the way down the bottom. And the most important thing is to figure out how to create systems of reuse. So rather than disposability, we design products that fit within what we call a product service system model. And I don't know where that slide is anymore because I've messed my whole process up. There we go. Which is essentially when rather than selling a product directly to the consumer and then the consumer being responsible for it, that you actually design a product that is delivering the functionality or service, and as the producer, you own it and you lease it to the community over and over again. So you're incentivized to make longer-lasting products because you make money off it over and over again, right? IKEA are doing this. They'll buy back your old IKEA products and resell them. This also is about repair and sharing systems. There's like a hierarchy of actions. And let me give you an example of what's happening. So a couple of years ago, France implemented a repair law that now every single piece of technology that's sold in France has to self-assess against 10 repair rules, like, do you have a repair manual? Are you making it easy for people to get parts? And Apple, who notoriously have not done those things, for the first time ever had to release their repair manuals because as a result, you get this like rating, and the rating has to be displayed on your product anywhere it's sold in France. And it looked really bad. So they had to make themselves look better. And these are the kinds of techniques and tools that are going to be coming on the market in multiple different ways, right? This is a movement. Countries all over the world are putting in circular economy policies. Designers have to be involved in this conversation and learn how to do this because it's really going to mean that we can create products and services that are circular and sustainable. And before I finish, with the additional time I got, thanks guys, I just want to say that like I could talk all about technical stuff, materials, all these things, but what actually is really critical is that we design really engaging experiences. So human-centered design, one of the propositions of it was designing frictionless experiences so people didn't know what was going on. Right? That's really one of the things that why we were so good at manipulating people to buy stuff they don't need, because we figured out humans. And so one of the things I think is a really big space is for us to take that knowledge of how to manipulate desire and convert it into making hope-based products, things that help design a solution that works better for us. Because one thing I know to be true is design is a very powerful tool that can be used as a weapon as much as it can be used as, I don't know, something that makes things nice. What's the opposite of a weapon? A hug? It can be used as a hug. And if you're not familiar with it, there's a whole body of work that monitors the dark patterns that companies use to manipulate people, deceptive design. You know that continuous scroll is based off a slot machine, right? It manipulates your dopamine receptors. And this isn't just that, it's websites that are designed that get you stuck in them. It's park benches that homeless people can't sleep on by design, right? So we have created a world to exclude people that's inequitable, whether it be websites that are not good for people who have hearing or eyesight issues. Like, we have to create a world that's not only sustainable, that it's accessible, and that it's ethical, and it starts with us designers. And that is a huge responsibility, and I totally get it. But at the end of the day, I always think, if it's not hard, why would you bother doing it, right? No. Well, that's how I think, and you could try it and see how you go. You might like it. So, what we're trying to do, and what I would love to leave you with, of all the things I've said, is that this goal of designing a system that has no waste is a really beautiful aspiration, and it's going to take a lot of different transformative actions to get there. But if we could just think about what kind of amazing world we would live in if we invested just a little bit of our intellectual and creative capacity in restoring the natural systems that sustain us. What kind of legacy would we be able to offer if we actually were able to give back more than we take as individuals and as a collective whole? And in order to achieve any success in this, we need to collaborate. We need to work together. We need to have a vision for a different future that disrupts the status quo, that does not allow us to enter into that climate catastrophic future that has been painted for us. And we need to align on a vision that is going to help us to get there. And that's going to create ideas, which designers are very good at it, and most importantly, transformation, which we each have the capacity to contribute to. So I will leave you with this, which is that the future that we end up in is not something that somebody else created. It's what we all contribute to creating through the actions we take today. And if you want any of my free resources, you can grab them there. We've got lots. You can grab them from the Unschool's website. We have whole toolkits on how to do circular redesign, how to activate your own agency. And yeah, thank you so much. You've been great.
Thank you. Give it up for Ms. Leyla Acaroglu, designing